So today, the session is about change in future society and university innovation. I believe that the change is taking place 5,000 years ago, today, and tomorrow, 5,000 years later. So change is not uncommon, but since we live the time today, the change is taking place today as important as others, and more important, especially in education, because education is a kind of a linchpin between people and the future. And we have four distinguished panel members, each of whom is representing various parts of the world through university. So let me have the pleasure of inviting these four presenters to present their views on how the university should be innovating in their countries as well as all over the world.
Bonjour à vous tous. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's my first visit to Korea, so merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I've had the great opportunity over the last several years to attend the World Economic Forum meetings in Davos, and so I've had many conversations about the fourth industrial revolution, and of course that has triggered for me important questions about the changing roles of universities in this environment. Of course, we know the fourth industrial revolution is not in the future, it's with us today. We see it every day in our lives, with many disruptive technologies increasingly being part of how we live, work, communicate with one another. AI, we hear about AI every day. We hear about drones, of course, blockchain, precision medicine, and many others. So this is very much part of our lives. And these so-called disruptive technologies are not only disrupting markets, they're having profound disruptions into the social fabric of our society. I think it is fair to say that we are not well prepared for these disruptions. If you think of the various tools that we would need, regulations for how drones are circulating in the airspace, governance structure, ethical consideration, so that we can make sure that these technologies have a positive impact on our lives, we are way behind. We are not well prepared. And we're seeing it in particular, I think, in the impacts of these technologies in the workforce. We had several already presentations this morning that talk about the disruptions in the workforce. And what we're seeing, certainly in Canada and many other parts of the world, is two things that are at the opposite end of the spectrum. One is that we have many positions that are now not filled. We can't find people with the talent we need. At the other end of the spectrum, many jobs disappearing or being so transformed that people are losing their ways to earn a living, and it's causing major problems and increasing discrepancy of wealth all over the world. So let me share with you a few numbers because I think they're quite telling. These were shared by the World Economic Forum at their summer Davos meeting in September. So right now, 71% of the tasks are done by human, 29% by machines. Now, what is projected is that in 4 years from now, not in 20 years, 4 years, these numbers will change to 58% by human, 42% by machine. Also predicted that 55% of people will need to upskill or reskill. And I think the important number here is 4. This is in 4 years from now. This is a very quick, fast pace of change that we're seeing right now. we know that the changes are not distributed evenly in all of the different segments of society. We also know that new jobs are being created, and these are ones that require distinctly human skills: creativity, cultural awareness, ethical judgment, emotional intelligence. These are part of the new jobs that we need, the kind of skills or the kind of attributes that we will need to fill those new jobs. Now, in Canadian universities, of course, and I would say as in every university around the world, that has led us to ask ourselves some very important questions, and I'll mention three. How can we prepare the current and next generations of students for the jobs of the future, jobs that we cannot even anticipate right now? How do we ensure that our learning environment can reach people who have not in the past been able to participate in higher education? And the third question, how do we provide the means for people already in the workforce to reskill or upskill so that they can maintain their jobs? Now, there's a more profound question, I believe, and that is about our role. You know, the great things about universities in the last century is that we have been able to play a role in providing people, individuals, an opportunity to climb the social and economic ladder. Very important role. Now, our role as motors of social inclusion, I would say, has never been more important than it is today, but never been more complex, as we see that these opportunities are not available to everybody, and we need to make sure that we can make them available. When I think of career path, and the career paths in the 20th century, the climbing the social and economic ladder, it was a nice model. I think of it today, the picture that I have in mind is the game of snakes and ladders. So you might climb the ladder, but you never know when that snake will be there and make you fall right to where you are as a successful person professionally, to having to start all over again at the bottom. And so these are the sort of things that we need to think about. Of course, we can take advantage of these technologies that are available to us, and taking advantage of them to make much more flexible and adaptable way of learning for people, particularly for new learners who have not in the past been able to participate. We need to contextualize learning models for them, make sure that we think of their own ways of learning so that we can help them find their path through the learning careers. For people in the workplace, we have all sorts of new models that are being adopted in every universities: hybrid learning, nano degrees, stackable certificates, very targeted programs to provide a person additional skills, additional competencies. And these are now part of the offerings of, I think, all universities. The one thing we know also is that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. But this is one of the advantages, I think, of the new technologies that are available to us. We are much better equipped now to customize learning for different people in different situations and with different learning styles. But not all of it is about technology. And I'll mention one example from my university that I think is a great way to bring education to communities that in the past could not take advantage of it. We have built programs in our Faculty of Education, so Bachelor of Education, in partnerships with Indigenous communities in Canada. And we are working with them, delivering the program in their communities, and also having a program that includes Indigenous culture, Indigenous languages, so that it is to the benefit of their community and the benefit of preserving their culture. So this is, I think, to me, a great example on how we need to bring the higher education to a much larger group of people and particularly those who were not able to benefit from it in the past. Now, I'll turn for the last 6 minutes or so to what I think is a very important question, is how can we prepare the current and next generation of students for the jobs of the future? Jobs that may not be we're not even able to anticipate today. I think the one thing that we know is that we have to make sure that we equip our students to be both job ready and future ready. Because as we heard this morning, the projection is that they're going to live a long life, probably till 100-year-old. They might have a job when they graduate. They'll have a different one 5 years from now, 10 years, 15, 50 years. And so we must make sure that we prepare them for the future. I think in terms of job ready, the sort of things that we're doing in Canada is giving our students an opportunity to practice what they learn in our universities right away. We call it work-integrated learning, and we have a great project that university leaders with the business leaders have built together. And the goal of our project is to give every single student an opportunity to have such an experience in the workplace. We also need to provide an environment to our students where they sharpen their leadership skills, their entrepreneurship skills, and that they can do that both in social innovation, in technology innovation. Great members of our extended community of alumni are coming to work with us in this area, being mentors, being part of networks so that the students can integrate that world with people who've traveled the path before. And also we need to engage our students globally, giving them the opportunity to be outside of their own environment, so to have global internships, to have study abroad cultural exchanges. I think that very important for our students to be future ready is to engage them in deep learning. To me, that means learning that stimulates them to challenge assumptions, to ask very tough questions, learning that nurture their creativity, their analytical skills. And we must do that in every area. If you recall what I was mentioning about the fourth industrial revolution, the biggest problems, in fact, are in policy, are in philosophy, ethics, and so on. So we need to make sure that we have people who are well prepared for asking those deep questions and having the ability to explore at a very deep level. Of course, we know lifelong learning will be part of our students' life, as they need to constantly readapt to a changing world. So I think perhaps one of the most important things is learning how to learn. I would end with what I think is what I would like to see every student leaving McGill University, what I'd like them to leave with. Most important thing for me is that when they leave our university, they discover their great capacity for learning. They have confidence. They have confidence that no matter what is being presented to them, no matter what challenge they'll be seeing in the future, they'll be ready for it because they know that they can learn. Merci.
Great.
This morning, former Prime Minister Reinfeldt said he was optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but optimistic. I am cautiously pessimistic about the university system of the United States and its ability to lead what has been called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or even be a serious part of it, with certain minor exceptions of 3 or 4 universities. American universities, and the problems are both political and structural. American universities prize institutional autonomy. Universities seem to believe that as long as they are not interfered with, they will continue to innovate and serve the needs of the country. But autonomy requires that sources of revenue that sustain the university should remain uninterrupted. To ensure a continuous and steady flow of tuition revenue, universities seek to become selective. Having more, or in some cases, many more applicants than places, insulates the university from outside pressures to a great extent. But selectivity necessarily entails exclusion. It is the tension between exclusion and inclusion that has led to some of the most important innovations in American higher education. The United States' oldest colleges, Harvard, William and Mary, St. John's, and Yale, all began as institutions dedicated to the education of the next generation of lawyers and clergymen. Apparently at the time, these were the only 2 professions with sufficient statute of merit a college education. The curricula consisted largely of reading the classics in the original Greek and Latin. The experimental sciences were absent from the curricula, as was medicine. This focus of the American university remained unchanged until the Morrill Act of 1862. During the United States Civil War, Congress has awarded tracts of land to be auctioned off for the benefit of institutions that would teach the agriculture and the mechanic arts. Some states matched the federal gifts with donations of their own. In addition to what we now call the federal land grant universities of the Midwest and the West, such as University of Illinois, University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin, there were some surprising beneficiaries, Cornell University and MIT. The act was a radical innovation in American higher education in at least 3 ways. First, it involved the federal government in higher education, despite the federal government having no constitutional role. Second, it encouraged people who would not normally have considered college to attend. But perhaps most importantly, it introduced subjects that were eminently practical into the college curriculum. Prior to the Morrill Act, all engineers were educated at the military academies. Afterwards, most were educated at land-grant colleges. As a result of this educational intervention and the later addition of farm extension programs attached to the land-grant universities, the percentage of the labor force devoted to farming dropped from 58% in 1860 to 38% in 1900, and it's now 1.5%. The next significant federal intervention was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, commonly known as the GI Bill. The GI Bill extended college education to people who never had an idea that it would happen. It was out of reach to them. The idea was not universally popular. In December of 1944, University of Chicago President John Maynard Hutchins remarked, "College and universities will find themselves converted into intellectual hobo jungles, and veterans unable to get work and equally unable to resist putting pressure on colleges and universities will find themselves educational hobos." Pretty strong stuff. Despite his misgivings, the University of Chicago enrolled veterans. Giving up football was much easier than foregoing federal money. By 1947, half of all college students were veterans. These were the first truly untraditional students. The state of California, under the leadership of Clark Kerr, authored a plan for higher education in 1960. California's plan became the blueprint for higher education for the rest of the country. Essentially, the plan was designed to prepare for the large generation, my generation, born after 1945, that was beginning to come of age. It was clear that resources, both human and physical, would have to be marshaled for the then largest birth cohort in the history of the United States. What was radical about the California plan was it guaranteed a place in the system for every Californian who could benefit from education or training. In short, everyone who graduated from high school was welcome somewhere in the California system, and at that time for free. The key to open admissions was the community college system, with its dual mandate, preparing students to transfer to four-year institutions or training them for the labor force. The California plan was soon replicated in New York State, although not the for free part. Most of the other states have followed this example. The era of mass higher education had begun in a deliberate way. In 1965, there were nearly 6 million students enrolled in college. By 1980, that number had doubled to 12 million. Today, it stands at almost 20 million. Another way to think about this expansion is to note that the percentage of the population in college has increased from 3.3% to 6.8%. I think it only fair to add that South Korea has achieved the California dream of almost 100% completion of some form of tertiary education. There is much we can learn from you and your success. There are a number of reasons that are offered for this increase in college going rates. There are more non-traditional students, there are increased birth cohorts. But the fourth and most important reason is the increase in the college going rate, especially of women. In 1960, approximately 54% of male high school graduates enrolled in college directly, while only 37.5% of women did. By 1988, the college going rate for women was 60.8%, and by 1997, it was over 70%. What has happened since 1960 is that a system that was predominantly male has been transformed into one that is now predominantly female. In 2015, 56% of all college students were female. The incoming classes in the professions of law and medicine that year that had overwhelmingly been male were now majority female. When Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg enrolled in Harvard Law, she was one of 8 women in a class of 500 and was told she was taking the place of a deserving man. This is selectivity morphing into bigotry. One of the reasons for the increase in women in higher education is that selective all-male colleges, Yale, Princeton, for example, began to admit women in 1969. Harvard, the old one, couldn't get it done until 1977. Women who had been excluded were now recruited. After a flurry of building in the 70s and 80s, the physical growth of higher education institutions, particularly public institutions, was curtailed. By 1980, public support, both monetary and moral, for the concept of inclusion had begun to wane. There were concerns that too many Americans were going to college. Of course, those concerns were always voiced by those who had already finished college. Enrollments, however, continued to increase. Resources were constrained and often falling. States were building prisons rather than classrooms. Colleges began to look for other ways to serve populations that did not strain physical resources. Chief among these efforts were branch campuses, extension centers, and sites. With main campuses at capacity, the only way to continue to expand was by building off-campus sites. And then DARPANet morphed into the internet. Entrepreneurial institutions sensed that by combining the personal computer and the internet, higher education could be offered to even larger numbers of eager students without straining the physical resources of the main campus. Online education was begun. The early efforts were promising, but were constrained by federal regulations. For each course offered online, the university had to offer another different course on the ground, so that no more than 50% of courses offered by an institution were offered online. 50% rule was repealed in 2006, ushering in the era of the completely online university. The outcomes, however, of those enrolled online were not particularly heartening. Graduation rates were extremely low, quality was often poor, and some institutions violated the law in attempts to increase enrollment. The next iteration of online education was the massive online open course, or MOOC. MOOCs were justified by touting their low cost and their ability to serve underserved populations. Unfortunately, analysis seems to indicate that MOOCs have worse outcomes than traditional online courses. MOOCs have a course completion rate of less than 7% per course. If these numbers are accurate, for every 10,000 students who enroll, only 3 will complete as few as 3 consecutive courses. A Harvard-MIT study claimed that only 3% of the enrollees were from underserved populations. 65% had already had a bachelor's degree. Some of the more recent attempts to innovate both on the ground and on the internet is what have been called competency-based education and its non-degree facsimile competency badges. Here again, innovation, if it is innovation, has been constrained by government regulation. In a complex society, an educational credential functions in a number of different ways, depending upon who's evaluating the credential. One of these ways is to differentiate the holder of the credential from those who do not hold the credential. So those holding a bachelor's degree are placed higher in the labor queue than those holding an associate's degree, who are generally placed higher in the queue than those who have a high school diploma and perhaps some competency badges. This is a function of the way HR works. The labor queue is further stratified by the perception of whether or not the credential is from an elite or non-elite institution. In the short term, innovations that do not consider this labor market search mechanism will not succeed, or will succeed only to the extent that the holders of the less prestigious credentials are willing to work for less money. In the United States, educational quality is often conflated with selectivity. The more selective a university, the more prestigious the credential. This is the essence of the tension between exclusivity and inclusion. The recent attempts at innovation that chiefly use the internet as a means of delivery will have to overcome their perceived inferiority. Even when selective institutions participate in these innovations, such as those offering courses through Udacity, Coursera, or edX, they are careful to differentiate their online content from their primary mission so as not to undermine the luster of their traditional higher education offerings. Clearly, to move further towards inclusion will require a sustained financial commitment on the part of the federal government and state governments. The political will to make that kind of commitment does not seem to be at hand, and has not for the last almost 50 years. It requires direction from the top, incentives from the top, to reshape the landscape of higher education in the United States, as the government did in 1862, 1944, and again in 1960. Real innovation needs financial inducements that will overcome the inertia of institutional autonomy of the American university. Thank you very much.
Right.
Right, thanks very much. I suppose what I want to do, I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, universities in Europe, but I also want to interrogate this concept of the Fourth Industrial Revolution as something which is, I suppose it's not a thing, it's a concept with a certain explanatory power. It's worth reminding ourselves that if we're talking about the idea of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what we're talking about something that comes after three other industrial revolutions. The first, which is roughly the industrial revolution of steam, the second, which is characterized by manufacturing, and the third, which is basically the first stage of computerization. What do each of these have in common? Well, they have a number of things in common, but one of the things that they all have in common is they all involve technologies. They're all defined by particular technologies, and those technologies all, to some extent, arose in universities. The second thing that these concepts that underlie our notion of the Fourth Industrial Revolution have in common is that they haven't gone away. We may not use steam very much anymore, but we still augment human power as much as we possibly can. We still use manufacturing, mass manufacturing techniques, and we still, God knows, we use computers. So when we talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it is not as if we are in some place that is completely other than the past. It is, we're in a period in which the past is there in a kind of sedimentary form. So I just want to keep those two ideas in mind, because I want to float an idea that we can layer on to the idea of the Fourth Industrial Revolution in terms of thinking about universities. And that's, if we take, say, this idea of the Fourth Industrial Revolution as first of all being characterized, and this is Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, characterized by much more ubiquitous and mobile internet, by smaller and more powerful sensors that have become cheaper, and by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And he goes on to say the Fourth Industrial Revolution is fundamentally changing the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, what I consider to be the Fourth Industrial Revolution is unlike anything that mankind has experienced before. Neither one of those definitions is terribly useful to me, because in some ways this tells me what the technologies are that enable the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the other piece of it simply says this is bigger, this is different than anything that we've experienced before. So I want to ask, how do we think about universities in this context? Well, I want to make a suggestion. I think we can look at 4 ages of the university, and I'm saying this very much from a European perspective because, of course, the oldest universities are European. It's the University of Bologna, is the oldest in the world, dates from 1088. And in the centuries that follow, we have universities growing up around medieval Europe. Oxford, 1096, Salamanca, 1134, Paris, 1160, Cambridge, 1206. My own university, Trinity College Dublin, is a relative latecomer in this stakes. It's founded in 1592. It comes at the end of what I would call the first age of the university, which is the medieval university. And the prime function of the university in this period is really the stewardship of scholarship. It's maintaining scholarship and passing it on to another generation of scholars. This is succeeded by what I would call the second age of the university, the professional university, which really, I mean, as a starting point, I would say the founding of the law school in Edinburgh in 1707 is really when you start to get the beginnings of what I would call the professional university. But this would include things like the founding of the world's first business school, ESCP Paris in 1819, the technological universities of the 19th century, ETH Zurich, 1855, Technical University of Berlin, 1879. And the function of the professional university is to train professionals, lawyers, doctors, engineers. This period, I would say, goes on until effectively World War II. There's a fundamental change after World War II. In the UK, for instance, between 1945 and 1951, the number of people in third level increased by 70%, from 50,000 to 84,000. There was a great wave of what the polytechnical universities in the UK and comparable institutions in Germany, in France, and right across Europe. These universities, these institutions were founded in order to democratize learning in the interests of social cohesion and equality of opportunity. So where are we now? I call this the global university, but it might not be the right term. It's the fourth age of the university. We still have stewardship of scholarship. We still have stewardship of information. But in a period in which there are nomadic flows of information, the idea of a university as a center for gathering scholarship seems a bit archaic. Likewise, the professionals that we train are rapidly being supplanted by machines, as we've already heard. We're not too far away from the first robotic pharmacist. We can do medical diagnosis by robot. A lot of legal tasks are done by machine. Accountancy is increasingly done by machine. So a lot of these things that we train our professionals for are being overtaken by machines. And I think in terms of the egalitarian university, of raising all boats, we know that the kinds of threats to jobs that we're hearing about in terms of the fourth industrial revolution is going to challenge that in a lot of ways. So there's a sense in which we can say, in this fourth industrial revolution, the fourth age of the university is one in which we have been disrupted. But let's think about this for a moment. We may have been disrupted, but we are also the disruptors. I go back to Klaus Schwab and the characteristics of the fourth industrial revolution. And he picks out a number of what he calls mega trends, technologies that are doing the disrupting. He picks on three in particular. He picks on 3D printing, nanoscience, and the Internet of Things. In the age of the fourth industrial revolution, things don't get bigger by getting bigger. They get bigger by getting connected, by getting networked. And that should give us a hint as to what universities looked like in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. Any of us here associated with universities could draw maps like this, and I happen to pick this one because it looks like the LOFAR map. This is the League of European Research Universities, which my university is a member of. All of our universities, I think, could draw similar maps of networks of universities with which we're involved. In the research field in particular, in Europe, this kind of networking is absolutely important because the major source of research funding is the European Research Council. Its budget for the next number of years, between 2014 and 2020, will run to 13 billion euros. So if you want to do research, you need to be networked. Likewise with teaching. I think all of us are beginning to become networked, become involved with other universities. In Europe, this has taken a step forward over the last year with the declaration that was made last December, and I shouldn't read this, where there was a declaration to involve strengthening strategic partnerships across the EU between higher education institutions and encouraging the emergence by 2024 of some 20 European universities. This is the idea of universities of Europe, that would be networked universities consisting of bottom-up networks of universities across the EU, which will enable students to obtain a degree by combining studies in several EU countries and contribute to the international competitiveness of European universities. So let's put these two things together. If we're looking at a fourth industrial revolution, where, as a recent OECD report puts it, we need to start to connect more with industry. What does this look like in terms of teaching? Well, this is my own university is in the process of building an innovation district. It's the little light bulb there in the middle, which is in an area that is surrounded by a whole series of tech industries. You see the logos there for Facebook, for Uber, for Stripe, for Google, for a whole series of industries. What we are building there is basically a kind of innovation hub where we have labs, where we have venture capitalists, where we have spin-out companies. We have the highest rate of student entrepreneurship in Europe already, and developing that and linking that to a new kind of learning space where we can do experiential and group learning that ties into this kind of innovation, this kind of connection with industry. That's one thing. The other thing, however, though, we need to, I think, really think about is that if, as this OECD report puts it, the future is uncertain and we cannot predict it, but we need to be open and ready for it, and other speakers have already alluded to this, for jobs that have not been created, for technologies that have not been invented, to solve problems that have not been anticipated. If that's the future we're looking at, then we need to think along the lines of Joseph Owen, and I find his book here, Robot Proof, to be really influential in my thinking about this, that in the age where machines can do the jobs of people better and better than people can, we need a number of competencies, and he refers to these as technological literacy, data literacy, but the one I want to focus on here in the last couple of minutes is what he calls human literacy. Even in the robot age, he writes, or perhaps especially in the robot age, what matters is other people. Human literacy equips us for the social milieu, giving us power to communicate, engage with others, and tap into our human capacity for grace and beauty. It encompasses the humanities traditionally found in liberal arts education, but includes elements of the arts. This is the kind of thing you can do in universities that are not huge. And it goes back to this idea of what is the optimum size for a university. In a world of connected networks, a university of maybe 20,000 can perhaps produce this kind of human interaction in a different way than a university that feels it has to grow and grow and grow. If we grow through being networked as opposed to simply getting bigger, we have perhaps a better chance of doing this. So, to wrap it up, what does it mean then to think about the university in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, to think of the fourth age of the university? I think we have to recognize that, like the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the fourth age of the university also contains within it the traces of its earlier periods, of the scholarly, professional, and egalitarian ages. I think we have to recognize that that relationship between research and teaching needs to become more intimate and rethought in lots of ways, because research is where the disruption is coming from, and we need to embrace that into our teaching. Networked universities are the universities for a networked world. And ultimately, what our aim is graduates who are robot-proof. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let me introduce some of our experiences in the fourth industrial revolution in higher education. Okay, what are the current realities in higher education? This morning, Vice Prime Minister Yoo mentioned that the Korean economy has grown last 50 years. On the average, the world economy has grown around 6.6 times bigger in the last 50 years. But in Korean economy, we have achieved 400 times bigger. So it is a marvelous, unprecedented historical events, but main elements and main reason is that education, especially the higher education. But that kind of higher education still valid in the 21st century. We just have some kind of question. And the Korean education system, just like a rote memorization and mass education, this kind of a standardized higher education and the rote memorization is our strength in the 20th century. The explicit knowledge is very important for the mass production and big companies' employment, but in the 21st century, it is still valid or not. We have to think about it. For example, if you just turn on just like a smartphone and you can answer any question within 10 or 20 seconds, you can just find the information and the knowledge. So if we simply memorize the knowledge and information, is still just valid in the 21st century, it is not good. So I just make it, the word pioneering intellectual is more important than the excellent ship. And we are competing with, not with the Seoul National University or Harvard or Stanford University. We are competing with, my university competing with, just like Microsoft or Google or Samsung or SK Groups. It means that, for example, my university, we have around 2,000 faculty members, but Samsung Electronics has alone, they have more than 3,000 PhDs in the company. They're developing, they're creating knowledges. But still, just like a 20th century, we are simply conveying our knowledge to the students. That is enough? I don't think it is not enough. And you see that in the Google campuses, they are doing their job at the moment, and not there just relaxing. So the working system is quite differently changed, and we are not doing simply the mass production. In the mass production, just like a system, we need experts and just the special knowledges. That is, we just call the explicit knowledge. But in the 21st century, we need the tacit knowledge, and the implicit knowledge is more important than the explicit knowledges. And many Korean students and college graduates are waiting for this kind of lining up the nice plane or the ships or the cruise boat or something like that. But it does not exist anymore. And we have to just sail by ourselves into the ocean. So I just changed my university into more creative one. So later I just mentioned that we just built the pioneering villages and the Pieville, and in the motto of the Pieville is the imagination is more important than knowledge. That is word by Albert Einstein. The reason is that knowledge is not enough in the 21st century. Okay, so the key elements for the future leaders, expertise is not enough. We need more other elements is necessary in the 21st century. Then, where should the university in the 21st century go from here? I just want to say that we need to raise social innovators. Social innovators means that solve any problem that is just faced to the students. For example, for the future leaders, we don't simply convey our knowledge to the students, but strengthen our just the muscles of our creating knowledges. That is very important, just the element for the 21st century leaders. So we just change our just like a lecture system into the flipped classes, and the students for the freshman year, from this year, we are just making the compulsory courses that is made by the flipped classes. The students watch the video clips in advance, and then they're just sending the questions to the professors and mass this kind of lecture just for 1 hour, and then it divided up 15 to 20 students and organized by the teaching fellow, and they're discussing. And then finally, 5 members of the students, they're just presenting as a project. So we are using this kind of thing. So a number of ideas, courses should be changed into the lecture, to the problem-based learning or project courses. So that is the reason we are changing every system. In research, up until now, Korean universities focused on the writing scholarly papers, just like SCI papers or something like that. But that is not enough. And you know that the Korean, in the world, Korea is #1 in terms of the R&D investment. And we just, number 2 is Israel. Our 4.29% of our GDP goes to research, R&D. But the effectiveness of the R&D, the knowledge creation, is not enough because they are only focused on the writing papers. So how to collaborate with the industry is very important and make it more effective. So we are just changing in that way. Okay, I just focus on the pioneering intellectuals and innovation. And the first one is that 3 no policies that I just took. For example, still the Ministry of Education asks us to check the attendance, but I just get rid of these kind of things. And no, just like the comparative assessment, no preparatory exam, and also the academic semesters. Usually, for one course, 3 hours a week, and the 16 weeks is the very common one. It existed from the 1960s and 70s but up until now. But now our courses changed into the project courses, so I just changed it into 8 weeks. If you just teach 6 hours per week, then it is enough. So the school starts, the semester just ends very quickly, and then we just send our professors and students to the foreign countries as an internship or something like that. And the reform of scholarship, we just provide a scholarship for the students who get a higher grade, but I just changed it into, it is simply just like a pocket money, or they are just wasting their money to purchase the smartphones or just the drinking or something like this. So I just changed it, just abolish any that kind of merit-based scholarship. And then we are sending program-based one. We are sending our students, for example, 100 students for China to taking intensive courses of Chinese language, and 45 students to Costa Rica and Mexico to learn the Spanish, and the 25 students to Japan, and 8 weeks in the vacation, and around the 15 hours they study in a day. So for example, one student who couldn't speak any Chinese languages, and after 8 weeks he just spoke without any script and 5-minute speeches in Chinese. So that kind of thing we are just making in that way. Innovation in research, we are selecting 100 crimson enterprises. It means that crimson is our university color. So, and also the global industries, we are just making this kind of collaboration. And this kind of planning, research planning, I just set up the Office of Research Planning, and then within 4 years, we have achieved $100 million US increase of the R&D, fund from the government toward the companies. And this one is PIVIL, Pioneer Village, is the, in here, students just talk and discuss. It's not a startup companies, but just like ideas, and no groups just occupy the whole just a period semester, and simply 1 month or something like that. Around the 60 groups already just participated in this program, and then we are developing that kind of things. And also the X Garage, that is, students can just make something, and 3D printers and that kind of things here in this way. And finally, I just want to say that university should not be just like knowledge transmitting places. Learning comes from the curiosity. So I just changed my university campuses from the learning places to the knowledge amusement park. Okay, Korea University started very late in 1905, and then at the time, to save the nation through education is our motto, just before 5 years before the Japanese colonization. So we are just facing this kind of a new challenge of the fourth industrial revolution, and we are innovate our university system into a new one just for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. What the university should be moving toward, and for that, thank you very much, and thank you all.